Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 23 of the podcast series. And we're filming on September 23rd, so maybe that's fortuitous. You can find me just about everywhere as Knitting the Stash, on Ravelry and Instagram, on YouTube obviously, and on the blog, which is knittingthestash.wordpress.com. I'm coming to you from Urbana, Illinois, the heart of the country of the United States, where I'm a professor at the University of Illinois. And today's episode is full of, I guess, lots of fun info, some whips, a finished object I want to talk about, and some news and notes from around the world of knitting. So thanks for joining me, and if you're new, thanks for checking me out, and if you're coming back, thank you as always for coming back to spend some more time with me. I am in a different spot in the house today. Trying to find good light around here is often a little tricky because we have an old Dutch colonial house, so the windows are really only on the first floor and only on the sides, and we're in a neighborhood, so it's kind of, the light isn't always coming through the windows, but right now it seems pretty good, so I'm gonna roll with it. Behind me over here is, I'm not exactly sure what it is. It's my husband's father's. And our friend came over and said, "Oh, you have a blah, blah, blah," and I can't remember what she said. So if anybody out there knows, I'd love to know more about it. It's a kind of wall hanging, it's woven, it's very old and kind of crinkly. I think it was actually originally a rug, but I'm not sure. It turns out we have wool and rugs and all kinds of things all over the house. If you've watched other episodes, you know I have my alphabet rug, and actually moved it downstairs, so it's hanging across from me right now. And so we ended up having a lot of woolen things hanging around. This room needed to have some extra wall hangings because when we moved all our furniture around after the summer, we moved kind of the office workspace into this room, and it was very echoey, kind of. So we've hung up some things around, and that's made the sound a little better. So one of the reasons to have wonderful woolens on your walls. So today, I want to start out with my Georgetown modification and move on to some whips and some other fun stuff. So here we go. This is Georgetown by Hannah Fettig, only it's not. You might have noticed. So the Georgetown pattern is the basic shell of this, and if you've watched other episodes, you saw the shell being knit. And the shell is, in her book, you can either knit her sweaters from the top down relatively seamlessly, from the bottom up in pieces. She has these great kinds of recipes so that you can do it either way, depending on what you like to do. So this one I knit from the bottom up, and you can see the shell ends about here. It's just kind of like mostly the back of the shell and just a little bit around the sides, up to the, I'm pulling bits and pieces off here, up to the shoulders. And then this little bit, this strip, kind of in the front of the sweater. And then after I knit the shell, which you guys saw, I did my sleeves, and I did German short rows for the sleeves, and this is where the modifications began. So I added some short rows in the back to lift up the back, and then in picking up the sleeves and knitting the sleeve caps, instead of doing wrap and turn, I decided to do German short rows because I really like those. After I worked on them with the Alias cardigans, I just think it's a really elegant way to do sleeve caps. So the sleeve caps are kind of knit from the bottom up around here, kind of going about this far across, maybe another third of the way, and then you just work your German short rows back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And the nice thing about the German short row is that you don't have to worry about finding your little wrap and lifting it up onto the needle. You're basically doing this technique where you're kind of pulling your yarn over to create what looks kind of like a yarn over, and then you're knitting, and then as you go back through, you just knit those two stitches that have been pulled over the needle together, almost like a brioche kind of technique, or what you do in brioche where you knit two things together. And so that's the German short rows on the sleeves. And then the biggest modification I did is that the original sweater had a very kind of plain ribbed front. And so what Hannah Fettig had you do in the pattern, at least, is you would pick up all of your stitches around the edge, and then you just knit a ribbed pattern this way all the way around. And it's an elegant sweater. It's really beautiful the way she did it. But for me, I thought it's a little bit plain. I kind of wanted to play around with some cables because you guys know I like texture. So I decided that I wanted to add a fairly large cable, and I think you can see that, yeah, to the front of the sweater. So I went to my trusty Noragons knitted cable source book, which I got over the summer. Excellent resource if you're into texture. And I spent a little time looking through and trying to decide what kind of pattern I wanted to put on the front, knowing that I didn't want to like weigh down the cardigan with too much cable. I didn't want like a massive band of cable. I also knew that it would probably roll up toward the top, so I wanted a cable that had a little bit of edging, and you can see the little bit of edging here. There's the cable portion is set in here, and I surrounded it by I think, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 rows. No, these are actually 2 and 2. Yeah, these are 2 and 2. So purl 2, twisted knit stitch 4 times over to kind of give a border to it. And that way if it rolled, it would roll on the border and not on the cable, so you'd maintain the cable. And then over here, going into the body, I knew I wanted to have a little bit more rib that would run down into the ribbing on the lower part of the sweater. So I added an extra little border here that kind of feeds into the main shell of the body, so that it wouldn't be a nice transition between the two. It wouldn't be an abrupt like shell, which is all stockinette, into cable. So I found this lovely pattern. This is the hexagrid pattern, and the hexagrid pattern, as you could see, has 3 cables running down, but her pattern is just for 1, and you would repeat that 3 times if you wanted the full hexagrid. And I decided just to do a single repeat of the cable, so that's what you have here, is just this single repeat of the cable. And yeah, so that was the main modification. Now, adding a cable to a sweater is a little bit tricky. This one in particular, because instead of picking up stitches and then knitting horizontally like you might normally do, you know, you're just kind of knitting all the way around, doing a rib as you go progressively around, I wanted my cable to move vertically up the sweater to the back. And so to do that, I used a technique that I learned from the Stornoway Throw by Anita Gran. And so basically I picked up stitches all the way around, but I then cast on, once I had all my stitches on, I cast on at the bottom here an extra 35 stitches across the bottom. And then it was those 35 stitches that I worked vertically up to the neck. And so that allowed me to work back and forth on those 35 stitches, working the cable pattern as I went on the right hand side, and then working across the back. And this cable pattern is fairly plain in the back. You're just reproducing whatever stitch you find. So if you find a purl, you purl. If you find a knit, you knit. And then my ribbing on either side. And then as on this side of the sweater, whenever I got over to the main body, I would then slip knit with one of my picked up stitches, so that I was slowly building this band as I knit vertically, but joining it with each row that I came back to the body. And because I picked up a lot of stitches, I ended up on the right side rows, I would pick up 1, and then pick up, on the second right side row, I'd pick up 2, then 1, then 2, then 1, then 2, to kind of offset how the cable was building all the way up. If you wanted less flare, you can kind of see that this sweater puffs out a little bit at the bottom here. If you wanted less flare to your sweater, I would have picked up fewer stitches as I went around the shell, so that the cable would sit a little bit more higher and more evenly on the body of the sweater, on the shell. As it is, I like the kind of flare, and I think the flare works with the way Hannah designed the shell, because the shell, as you can see, is, you can kind of see there, the shell's a little bit drapey. Kind of see how that flows a little bit. And when I added the cable, even though I had a lot of like extra stitches picked up, it didn't end up distorting the fabric in any way. So you can see that the stockinette is maintained really nicely, and it kind of flows right into the cable. One tricky thing that I will have to credit to Spencer, my husband, who is an awesome knitter in his own right, and is out working on the prison bus right now. If anybody's interested, I haven't mentioned the prison bus in a while, but I can see it out that window. We have a prison bus in our driveway that my husband's been working on. He's converting it, I think, to like an RV, but I don't know, I'm trying to kind of stay out of it a little bit. But it's in our driveway, and it's 40 feet long, and it's massive. And it covers like 3 or 4 windows in the house. This is probably why we don't have as much light. Yes, we live in a house with a lot of windows, but we also live in a house where like half the windows are covered by the prison bus. So I'll put a link to all of his videos in my show notes just in case you're interested. But as I was knitting this sweater, back to the story, I was like, oh, I'm gonna just do this cable up and around and just come back down the other side. And of course, Spencer looked at me and said, in all of his infinite knitting wisdom, he's like, well, but then your stitches would be upside down on the other side. I thought, you're right. You're totally right about that. So I knit the cable all the way up to the top, and I think you'll be able to see this here. Right here. So I knitted up to the top, left the stitches live, and then came around to this other side over here and did basically the same process. So I had my stitches already picked up, and then down here at this bottom I cast on another 35 stitches and began to work vertically. Now the trick is that when you reverse sides on a cable cardigan like this, I was no longer working my connector rows, this where I was connecting it to the body, on the right side. They started to be wrong side rows because of the mirroring, right? So because of that, instead of slip knitting my live stitch to my picked up shell stitch, I did a purl two together on the wrong side row, which produced what I wanted, which is this twisted kind of knit stitch here, which mirrors the slip knit on this side. Tricky, eh? Right? So I continued that all the way up here, and at the end I had those live stitches, and the collar kind of stands up nicely. You can see that, maybe. I'll lower her down just a little bit so you can see it. Well, there's some good light in here right now. I think you'll be able to see it. Lowering the model takes a moment. Okay, so in the back here I had my live stitches from this side, and I came up with my live stitches from this side, and I put them together in a nice 3 needle bind off here. One of the tricky parts, and I'm not sure you can positively see this, but I will insert a photo, is that I wanted the cables to match up in the back, and it was you'd think I planned the whole thing. And I did plan as I got closer. If I needed to, I would kind of swap out a double pickup for a single pickup to make sure that I had the right number of stitches to make sure I had the right number of rows. But it worked out, and I ended on row 17 of the cable pattern for both sides. And then I did my 3 needle bind off in pattern so that it, you know, it finishes nicely. So the purl stitches are purled and the knit stitches are knitted. Anyway, that's my main. That was it. So it's really a kind of cool flowy garment. You can keep the neck up if you want, or it has this kind of nice roll to it. When I put it on, it's just kind of like the warmest, most wonderful sweater, most comfortable, really great. And I think I'll show that to you guys. I'll insert some video here. Okay, so that is the Georgetown sweater, all modified. Thank you to Hannah Fettig for a beautiful shell pattern, and then thank you, of course, to Nora Gahn for her knitted cables source book, which provides so much great inspiration if you're interested in textured knitting. I'm really happy with the way it came out, and I'm super excited. I think that Julie of Knitted Bliss is actually going to feature it on her Modification Monday post this coming week, so I'm a little excited about that. To finally feel like I've gotten to a point in working on sweaters where I can take a pattern and completely mod it in my own way. I think the next step is designing, so I'm maybe gonna take that leap. We'll see. I'm kind of excited about it. So that is Georgetown. And up next, I have a whip for you. After finishing Georgetown and carrying it with me everywhere and working on these cables and whatnot, I wanted something kind of super simple. I'm also still waiting for Spencer's sweater yarn to come in, so I didn't want to start yet another sweater while waiting for that yarn. And you know how it is, sometimes you finish something big and you just want something fun to play around with. So I had some yarn from Into the World, which is a pretty cool indie dye company that does both fiber and yarn. So I had this funky yarn, which is, and I have the tag and the colorway here, this is Mukina from Into the World, and it is 100 grams, 460 yards of BFL and nylon. You guys know how I like my BFL for socks. It's good stuff. But when I offered this as socks to a couple different people, they took a look at the yarn and they just thought, it's okay. I don't really want socks in it from that yarn. I was like, wow, I've never had anyone refuse socks from hand-painted yarn. But they didn't really dig it. So I was like, well, what am I gonna do with this? I need something. It was all caked up. So I've been looking, as you guys know, if you've been reading the blog, I've been looking for ways to destash, knit up, work with variegated yarns, because I have a tub full of beautiful indie dyed yarns, and you know, it's like, what are you gonna do with them all? Yeah, I could knit a million pairs of socks, but I also want to do some other things with them. So I found this, which a lot of you have knit, I've seen. It's called the Shawl Linus, or the Linus Shawl, and it's a really cool pattern that begins with just a few stitches at the bottom, down here, just 5 I think, and then you're working a very simple bias. I'm trying to like hold it at the same time that I'm showing you. It's basically a very simple bias pattern where you're doing an increase on one side, and on the other side, on the right side, you're doing a yarn over and then a decrease, and then on your other rows you're doing an increase. So you're basically creating this biased fabric that kind of moves this way. And if you like me hang out on Craftsy a lot, you've checked out Bristol Ivy's Knitting on the Bias class, and I actually checked it out over the Labor Day weekend when Craftsy was offering the kind of like, check out all our classes for free day. And I fell in love with Bristol Ivy's, I really love her personality, and our classes really just seemed very great. So I'm taking her on the bias class, and I'm knitting up this shawl, which is really kind of on the screen, I'm looking at it, it's almost like animal print or something. It's got these great pieces of kind of color pooling going on there, and then striping going on down here, and more striping up here. The other reason I'm interested in working on this project is that because I'm interested in variegated yarns, I'm interested in the color pooling itself, like where they're color pooling. And I've mentioned on here before that there's a great computer, a little app online that'll show you kind of what happens with variegated yarns if you're using different numbers of stitches. And there are places when, if you have, you know, a certain number of stitches, usually for sock yarn like this, it's around 64 stitches, where you'll start to get some kind of patterning or some kind of like nice repeatable variegation. And then there are places where if you knit a wider swatch with a different number of stitches, you'll get some really interesting color pooling effects. And so what I'm going to do with this shawl is, yes, I'll probably wear it or give it away or as a present or something, but I'm also going to do a blog post where I talk a little bit about color pooling and show you the kinds of places and numbers of stitches that this color pooling happens, and how to kind of maybe predict it, maybe try to figure it out. It's one of the things I'm trying to design with and play around with, and so the shawl is helping me do that. And I kind of like the way it's turning out because it's funky. Yeah, so that's the Linus Shawl, and that is by Annette Cordes, and a lot of you have been knitting it one way or the other, and it's a great way to use up variegated yarns because they just do what they do, and it's a very simple knit. I can take it with me to my son's soccer games. He's got a tournament all weekend, and yeah, exactly. So that's my work in progress, until Spencer's sweater yarn gets here. And yeah, so I have some awesome blanket squares. They're not my finished objects, but they are your finished objects. So for those of you who have been tuning in for a while, you know about the Knit Together project. And if you're interested in finding out more information, you can head over to the blog, just knittingthestash.wordpress.com/KTP. And the Knit Together project basically came out of seeing Spencer, my husband, do this interesting thing on YouTube where he was sent something, he was sent this ice pick. And he was supposed to make a video about it and then send it on to another YouTuber. And it got me thinking, like, what if knitters passed around like DPNs and knit together and thought about how our community is connected? So I got some DPNs, I rounded up some awesome podcasters and bloggers and started out the Knit Together project. And so far we've received some really great squares. The whole idea is that if you want to get involved, you send an 8x8 knitted square to me, and it's made from a yarn that you really care about, something that's special to you. Or if you receive these DPNs that are making the rounds, I think there are 7 or 8, maybe 9 pairs all around the world right now just being used by knitters to knit these squares. So if you get tagged and you get these needles, then you knit up a square, send it to me, and send the needles on to somebody else and tag them. So I have a couple original square folk today, and I have a couple of tagged square folk, and actually I have one original, one tagged, and one out of the blue. So I want to share them with you because they're really fun. So this one is from Rachel of Treehouse Knits, and it is just the most beautiful. I wish you could like smell it and just kind of squish it. It is a really beautiful square that is really plump and kind of chunky and squishy. And Rachel said, I chose this beautiful Sevia merino cross wool from the adorable sheep named Storm. She was born during a strong storm, hence the name. Storm lives a few minutes south of me, and I actually saw her being sheared. Her fleece was spun at my hometown woolen mill in Frankmuth, Michigan, I think. Love her provenance, makes me feel so connected. Rachel of Treehouse Knits. So Rachel, thank you so much for sending in your beautiful square. I love it. I love that it came from like stormy sheep, and it's just so special. So that is Rachel of Treehouse Knits, and you should check out her blog or podcast, which is really awesome. She does a lot on different sheep breeds, and latest episode is just out now, and I can't wait to catch up on it this weekend, so check her out. Okay, so the next square I have is from Lisa Fliss, and she is Rabbit Smile on Ravelry, and Lisa is one who is a knit together person who's tagged by one of the initial Knit Together folk, and this is her beautiful square. Check this out. Gorgeous pattern, right? I think the Noro and the lace, which I think is being picked up there, it's just a gorgeous pattern. So here's what Lisa had to say about her square and the yarn. She said, there are a couple thoughts behind my choice of yarn, Noro Curion. First, when I discovered Noro yarns and their beautiful color combinations, I was enthralled. It was rustic and sophisticated at the same time. I came to realize that there really weren't any other companies producing the same type of color changing yarn, except it could be duplicated by hand spinning. This led me to eventually learning to spin and purchasing my wheel, which has given me a great joy. So I've chosen a yarn that reminds me of happiness. And she said, second, in January of this year, I decided to add a special level of mindfulness to my knitting projects. I carefully select a location that is tied to each project somehow. Then while I'm knitting, I can think about the place and what it would be like to be there. I've tagged all my projects for 2017 with Traveler, as this best sums up my perspective on this idea. My name for this square is Salt Fields, S-A-U-L-T Fields, which is an area in France where lavender is grown in great abundance. The color of the Noro Curion and the stitch pattern I've chosen, I felt fit together perfectly, and they certainly do, Lisa. Thank you so much. Again, Lisa is Rabbit Smile on Ravelry, beautiful square that she sent in. Thank you, thank you. And I have one more to share, actually 2 more to share with you today, from Lesley Busalova, who's from Decatur, Georgia. And Lesley got in touch with me over Ravelry, and I think we're buddies on Instagram too. I think that's the same Lesley that also told me about the spools that I'm going to talk about in a minute. I think so. I'll have to check into that connection. So she sent 2 8x8 swatches. Let me show them to you first. One is beautiful, just a plain kind of white that really highlights the yarn that she's using. Beautiful. And the other is a kind of cabled version, which has this beautiful textured cable. It's nice and chunky down the middle. Just love that one. Really awesome. Okay, so Lesley, I'll hold these guys up a little bit. Lesley wrote in to say, these were made of a fleece I received from my sister-in-law who lives in Justinad Orlishi in the Czech Republic. I hope I got the name right. Who has friends that have sheep. I've tried to find out what kind of sheep they are, and the answer they gave me was meat breed. I'm still trying to pin them down for a more specific breed. This fleece is special in that it came from the Czech Republic, and it's the first fleece I ever skirted myself. So cool. I skirted the fleece, sorted my locks by size, structure, and then washed those locks with their matching buddies in wrapped packs of crinoline based on lock size. Then I laid them out to dry for several days, and once they were dry, I flicked the locks open and spun them into singles. Lastly, I 3-plied them, which makes sense because this cable is so plump and beautiful. Like a 3-ply yarn really picks up on that texture. So good choice, Lesley. So she 3-plied them into yarn. This yarn has a wonderful luster and in my opinion is soft for next of skin. It's not merino or cormo, but all the same, it's lovely yarn, and that is so true, and it's even more lovely just to know the story behind the yarn. So, Lesley, thank you for these beautiful squares. 2 of them, awesome, and I can't wait to see more. Hopefully more will arrive in the mailbox in the next couple of weeks from you guys out there in the world, and I would love to feature them on the podcast, so keep the squares coming and keep the stories coming, because it's so fun to hear about where this yarn is coming from and what actually matters to you all out in the knitting world. Okay, so that's been your update on the Knit Together project, and I think we're up to over 10 squares now, which is pretty amazing for just a month or so. And this project is ongoing at least for the whole year, so if you have any excitement or interest in getting involved, please just check out that Knit Together project page for information, or get in touch with me on Ravelry. I'd be happy to talk you through it. Okay, so now we're on to news and notes. News and notes are kind of fun because it's one way to share what's going on in the knitting community with you guys. And I think I might keep it as a kind of regular segment in the podcast, but you let me know what you think. I was hanging out with my guild mates this past week. Oh, Debbie pulled out some cool bobbins that she had. And I can't remember where she said she got these from. Somebody had been collecting them. So there are 2 of each of these. I just pulled out one of each variety. So there's these guys, which are just, they look the plainest to me. They don't seem mechanical all that much, right? There's these guys, which definitely seem mechanical because they have slots to be able to sit on the mill machine. Same with this guy, it's a longer version, but you can see they kind of smell really good. They smell a little like old wool and lanolin and wood. So these are the bigger ones, and then these guys, which were kind of like the strangest. And so I've been kind of crowdsourcing, like what in the world, how, where, what do we do with these bobbins? What do we know about them? And Lesley, which I think is the same Lesley, but I'm gonna figure that out. Okay, Lesley wrote in to say, the big ones, which are these green ones, the big one goes on the twister frame, she said. They would twist 2 strings together, sometimes more. So that's these guys. The tall wooden ones in the back, these guys, this is the biggest mystery one, right? She said the tall wooden ones in the back are from roving frames, and they made what was called roping. The roping was pulling on a spinning frame to make thread. Then the thread would go on the twister. And so, I think I got that right. I think these are the big ones in the back she was talking about. I guess she was hanging out with her uncle this weekend, and her uncle happened to have worked in her grandfather's mill. for many years, and so he had some cool information about the bobbins. But if anyone else out there knows anything about machine milling and bobbins, I would love, 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 love if you guys would send me comments or leave comments here on the podcast so that we can all learn a little bit more about how mills work and how these bobbins would have been used. To my mind, I love the wear and tear on them. I love the idea that these were, you know, on the machines, just winding up all of the yarn that was being spun off. It's just so cool. So if anybody has any other info about bobbins or knitting mill or spinning mills, I would love to hear from you. So please share your knowledge. Let us all know what's going on with the bobbins. Okay, 2 more things for news and notes. One is that let's see, 2 podcasts ago, I think, I was the one that was about in the grease, where I was looking for yarn that I could use for Spencer's sweater that would be in the grease, would still have some lanolin left in it. I gave a shout out to Anna of the Dunkelgrun podcast to ask her, since she's a chemist, she's a PhD chemistry awesomeness over there. She's also a yarn dyer. She does a great podcast, beautiful knitter. You should check her out. But I gave her a little shout out like, hey Anna, can you say something about lanolin? Surely maybe you know what the deal is with lanolin and wool, or adding lanolin back into wool. And Anna came through. She did a wonderful podcast about lanolin, not only the chemistry, but some of the local products she uses. And she talks all about how you can get lanolin back into your wool. Super awesome podcast. I was like listening with rapt attention, try to learn as much as possible about lanolin. So thank you so much, Anna, for taking the time to research it and then put it out there in your podcast. The world of wool is better for your knowledge, so thank you. And last but certainly not least, I am always in the market for new books, especially books about spinning up fiber braids that are multicolored. And I've been struggling with this for years. I have a lot of braids upstairs in my stash that I've collected, and I just can't quite bring myself to spin because, like, what do I do? I don't want to mess up the color. I don't want to muddy it. I don't want to. And I've looked at a lot of books. There's Spinning in Color. There's a new one out from Sweet Georgia about color, and I have both of those and I've read through them. But this new one that I found by Alanna Wilcox is just seriously one of my, I'm like super excited about it. So I just want to share with you guys. So here's the cover. I got the ebook version of it. And I'm also getting a soft cover or hard cover. I think it's a soft cover copy. But if you purchase the soft cover, you get the ebook too. And Alanna Wilcox was, she was working on her master's spinner certificate, which takes a long time and is a very intensive process. You basically are writing like a thesis or a dissertation at the end of your master's spinners about something new some new knowledge that you're going to bring to the world of spinning and wool. So her thesis, her final master's spinning thesis, was on exactly this question that a lot of us struggle with, which is what to do with multicolored hand-painted fiber braids, so that you get the results you want, so that you know how to break up the color and you know how to create a yarn that's not only in the colors and kind of like it comes out in a pleasing way that you were purposefully trying to spin for, but also then produces a knitted fabric that you really were looking for as a final product. It's a complicated kind of process, and this is a really terrific book. I'm about like a third of the way through so far. This is her table of contents, so you can kind of check out what she's covering. She's basically covering color theory, of course, and then the spinning mechanics, solid and crisp colors, barber pole and heathered yarns, blended and muted yarns, and then she has tons of different appendices and references. It's an incredible reference source book, and I'm really I want to work through it like cover to cover with my braids upstairs and just finally produce some yarn with those colored braids that I really am proud of and I like. So it's a really great impetus a nice challenge and a really excellent resource, and I would highly recommend it. Alanna Wilcox, she has the knowledge. She's dropping the knowledge in the book, and you can get it from her. She's kind of shipping on a rotating basis because she's put the book out herself, and I can't highly recommend it enough. Now, if you're looking for resources about spinning braids just on the internet, there are plenty of great people out there, and I've hyped Rachel Smith of the Wool and Spinning podcast on here before. Rachel Smith has been doing, last year she did an entire year on color study, both in the Ravelry group and on the podcast. And then this year I think they combined their color study with their breed study. So there's a whole set of learning going on over at Rachel Smith's Wool and Spinning podcast. So if you like to learn this kind of thing in a community setting, you want a place where you can ask questions and have some real expertise just on hand at the tips of your fingers on Ravelry, then go check out Rachel Smith's Wool and Spinning podcast. She has a Patreon site, she has a Ravelry group, the whole deal, blog, the whole thing. It's really great. The other person that I've been watching is Grace Shalom Hopkins, and she's on YouTube. She has a bunch of videos up about all kinds of different spinning techniques with color. And she'll do a video without a voiceover if you're not a Patreon subscriber, and she does videos with voiceover if you're a Patreon subscriber. So you can kind of make the choice of which level you want to get involved in. And she too has a bunch of books out, or pamphlets, and then she's just put out a book on spinning up roving, I think. So there's tons of great resources out there in case you are a spinner who has, like me, tubs of beautiful hand-painted fiber, and you're just like paralyzed with fear about where to go and how to spin them up. So I hope that's helpful, and that is the last of my news and notes for you. Otherwise, I am going to get on with my Linus Shawl, and I'm going to hopefully hear from you guys about these bobbins and more blanket squares. Keep them coming. It's awesome. I love to feature your work on here. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you in a couple weeks, and happy knitting.